Today on Literally Books, the podcast, we have Julia London, who is the New York Times bestselling author of over 60 fiction novels. Her latest book, Nice Work, Nora November, came out this year on June 4th and follows the main character, Nora November, who creates a reverse bucket list after a near-death experience. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
We have so many questions about the book, so many questions about your writing process. We'll try not to take up the rest of your day, but tons of things that we want to ask you. So I'll kick us off with our first question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Nora's reverse bucket list is super intriguing to me because it seems intentionally focused on goals that are more achievable, and some might say like kind of rooted in day-to-day activities. I'm super curious how you arrived at approaching a bucket list in that way, and then also what you think the role of everyday activities are in sort of building a meaningful life.
Oh, good question. Well, I guess I felt like, Nora, because it is a reverse bucket list, and maybe I should clarify, she has a near death experience. And then when she comes out of that, she thinks about all the things that she wanted to do and never did and creates the bucket list. So it wasn't like she was thinking, all right, I'm not going to be here much longer. I really want to climb a mountain, or I really want to, I don't know, sing in an opera. She started thinking about how close she came to having ended, gone off into the ether with a lot of things undone. But they were simple things, and she even thinks about how this isn't a very ambitious list, but they were things that meant something to her, and she couldn't quite figure out why she never did them. And I think about that a lot, in my own life. Like, why didn't I ever, I always wanted to take like an art class. I don't know if I have any talent for art, but I would, why didn't I pursue that? And it just becomes an issue of like, life goes on, you have to work, you have kids, you have, all this stuff going on, and you just don't ever make time for it. And she decided that she needed to make time for it just to find out what really spoke to her. And I think that was Nora's biggest problem, is that she was in a situation where she didn't really know who she was without that situation around her.
I love that idea of pursuing your interests as a way to sort of find your identity. Did you pull some of the activities on her reverse bucket list from things that you yourself, I know you mentioned wanting to take an art class, or any of the other ones from things that you yourself want to kind of pursue as a hobby?
The art class, I never really wanted to like do it so badly that I would have it on my reverse bucket list. But, I just thought that was something that would speak to her. But the only thing on there that really, I think is cooking. And I still think that. I'm a terrible, terrible cook. And I never learned how, but I have this vision in my head of me being like a gourmet cook, like throwing on an apron, and I have these ingredients and this is what I'm going to make, throwing it into the pan and it's a great meal. Never. And even if I have ingredients and I know how to make something, I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'll just order from P. Terry's or something.
That's funny.
I feel
For
the exact same way. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, like, for the paint class though, because it sounded so realistic, like when they go to the painting class with Gus, where they're having to do this thing where you have to draw the shape that defines you.
Yeah.
I have never heard about that. Like, how did you go to some place where that was like a thing that they had to do, or how did you come up with that?
No, I didn't. I just made that up. I figured that
Oh,
in an art class, you would like learn about shapes and shadows. I just kind of thought about the kind of things you'd probably learn about. So I thought, well, that's something that they could start with and make it more interesting than draw a circle, like draw your shape. So
I
forgot
love
about
that.
that. I don't know what my shape would be. Don't ask me.
Magda
I don't
and
know
I,
what my shape would be.
we went down a rabbit hole when
Yeah,
we did the deep dive of the book about what our shapes would be. We were very in love with that idea.
yeah, it was
Did you
really
come up with
lovely.
a shape?
We did. So mine
Okay.
was a zigzag because it's just like life just takes you everywhere and you don't know where you're gonna end up. So that was my shape. And then
Yeah.
Lindsay.
Mine was a spiral, and that's just because I run on the more neurotic side. And it's why, I'm in love with Nora so much because I feel like she's so relatable. And so I love the idea that she was sort of like trying all of these things and sort of ending up where she started, but from a slightly different perspective. So yeah, we
Yeah.
had a long conversation about this.
Yeah.
um, the next thing I want to ask you about is we did a little deep dive into your history, and I found out that you worked in public administration and as a civil servant in Washington D.C. and in Austin for a really long time, which
Yeah.
was so fascinating. And I was curious if any of your experience sort of informed Nora's perspective of her career in law and her kind of approach to careers in general.
I've known a lot of lawyers. I don't have any legal background myself, but I've known a lot of lawyers. I think my experience in government in particular, especially at the White House, helped me form her father's personality because there are so many narcissists in Washington. I mean, I used to say that it, kind of attracted the cream of the narcissistic crop. I mean, it's because it's all about power. It's all about power there. So I would say that it helped me kind of like craft him. And so did Thomas J. Henry. Y'all are in the Austin, so you
Oh
see those
yes,
ads,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So he
with
was
the
really
Yep.
easy
yeah,
to use.
getting off the private jet, all serious, you know.
Yes, I read that he like helicopters from his house in the Dominion in San Antonio downtown. And I'm like, oh my God, he sounds like David November.
I love that because, in your book, you also make a reference to call the force, the 444-444, which is a
Yeah.
real phone number for a lawyer here in Austin. And I was thinking, I'm like, do you know the lawyer? Or like, how do you go about doing that? Because do you have to ask permission when you put him in the book? Or like, was it
No,
just coincidence? Like, how
no.
does
I
that
mean,
work?
he doesn't own four. So,
He looks
well,
like
I
he
You're a
does.
good caller.
He says, call the force.
call it four. Yeah. And I think, I've
Oh.
been in a lot of cities and I think that four number is like common for people to get in their
Oh.
exchange. So it's pretty common or to get one number anyway. So, yeah.
That's really funny. Yeah, when I was reading, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is a real person. I need to go look it up. So that
Yeah.
was really funny. Um, and just kind of switching it up a little bit more. So I know that in our last author panel that we went to see you at, you kind of talked a little bit about some of the research that you had to do for some of your like fictional, your historical romance books.
Hmm.
Where you had to go to Scotland and England to do this. I'm kind of curious about your process, that what kind of research you had to do in order to talk about the hospice and palliative care, because you wrote it so beautifully and you humanized these characters that were only with us for a page or less than a page. So I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious what your process was to write those characters.
Well, I read a lot, and I found some blogs online from hospice nurses, and they describe, there's such an interesting area, I think, because everybody describes sort of the same kind of phenomenon with people. Like, for example, seeing a loved one right before you die, and even my grandmother, I remember, she saw her brother right before she died. So things like that. But then some of the more poignant stories of, because you never think about hospice with a young person. I mean, walking
Yeah.
around our lives, we're thinking about old but young people and how they approach it. And there were so many similarities. And I just read a lot about it too. And then I read a lot about the afterlife and, what near death experience and that sort of thing. And then, you know, well, that mostly books. I mean, for the mental health aspect, I've read a lot. I've had a lot of experience in my own family. I think I talked about that at the author event, but I've also been to several support groups and classes with the National Alliance of Mental Illness. I always want to say mental health, but no, it's mental illness. It's just NAMI. So I've learned a lot from that too.
Yeah.
I just
You
studied
yeah,
it.
you did it so beautifully. Yeah, you did it so
Thank
beautifully.
you.
And like I think from the first I loved the first chapter, which was just the opening scene of her kind of going through that experience. And
Yeah.
what I loved the most is that her dog was there.
Yeah.
So that kind of hit me so lovely. Like I had recently lost my dog. So I was just like, that's it. I'm gonna see him again. It's gonna be great. It's
Yeah.
perfect. So yeah,
That
really
is
enjoyed that.
that's my belief. I don't know about ancestors or people I've loved, but my dogs need to be there when I go.
Same,
I've
same.
had a lot.
That's what
Yeah,
drew
so
us in.
then
Yeah.
I'll be fine.
There are real soulmates. Let's be real. I think we're all
Yes.
dog people on this
Yes,
call.
absolutely.
I mean, that's what I told my husband. That dog was the love of my life. I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and sort of on the same front, we talked about mental illness and mental health a lot as part of the book. I think Magda and I talk about this a ton on this podcast. It's why we do this podcast. Is like the importance of community, especially in women centered stories. And something that I love that you incorporated into the book is I think Honora initially goes about her kind of mental health improvement as a pull yourself up by her bootstraps. She's going to do all these things and take it on, and she's going to do it perfectly. And I think what we learn as she sort of has these trials and fails is that it's really her relationships with the other people that really bolster her
Mhm.
ability to keep going, or at least that's how I read it. Were you thinking about that when you wrote about mental health, or what role do you think community has in sort of creating a healthy mental state of mind?
Well, I have to think about how to put this. It's a whole like the found family versus the natural family, especially when it comes to mental health. And, a good example is Lacey, her sister Lacey, who's the rock in the family. But, when you deal with somebody in your family that has a mental illness like that, it becomes so burdensome. And sometimes your family is not the best place to get that kind of support. Sometimes it's like the found family that sees you from a different perspective, not the sister who's always screwing up, but like, here's my friend that's having these issues, and here's somebody that, I'd like to help, or here's somebody that I get. And so I do think community is really important. And I think like finding your community and not assuming it's like family all the time. In fact, I could argue in some cases, and I'm talking from personal experience, family's like the worst community you can have if you're having any kind of mental illness or mental health problems.
They're more
There's
judgy
just too many
sometimes.
expectations, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's like the role expectations with siblings, there's the parental expectations and your expectations of your parents. I mean, I just think it's like really hard sometimes to overcome those things that are so baked in. And then you add a mental illness on top of it. It's really hard.
Oh, Julia, that's a shot to the heart. I want another book just about that sentence. That was really beautiful.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, honestly, like I think that's what I think it's pretty clear that Magda and I were in love with this book, and I think a lot of
Mhm.
it was just the relationships that you build are so beautiful and complicated and realistic. I think a lot of people have those kinds of relationships with people in their lives, so it was just a thrill to read. Pivoting completely though, something else that you mentioned in the author event that I was super interested in is you ultimately had outlined this book from a male kind of rom com perspective and changed it. And I'm curious how you know when you're writing something that you kind of are wanting to pivot to a different perspective or a different storyline, and sort of how you got there with this book.
I don't know if I can answer that. It's kind of like just knowing it, but I was working on this guy, and his bucket list was different. Like it started with the girl who got away, and his bucket list was ambitious in the way that men are ambitious, and not ambitious in a way that women are. And the more I thought about it, the more it just didn't wasn't a good fit. And I kept thinking, like, for a rom-com, I'm not talking about men in real life, I want to say that, but in a rom-com, they're supposed to be kind of the ideal, and he wasn't turning out to be the ideal. He's turning out to be kind of whiny. Whereas in Nora's position, she's not. I guess I could connect to her a lot better about why she was feeling some of these things, or why she had let herself get into the situation that she had. And for my rom-com hero, it just didn't make sense at all. So I just
That's
tried it.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And it
really
became less
interesting because
funny. So,
it's interesting because we initially thought that maybe Jack was supposed it was supposed to be maybe from like Jack's point of view that you were kind of working on, but it doesn't sound like that was the case at
Oh
all,
no,
that you
Jack
fully
was,
changed the
yeah,
entire thing.
yes, because Jack, again, he's a nurse, and he has his own feelings um, about death, and I just couldn't see that in a rom com. Have you guys read rom coms? Do you read
Oh,
them?
yes.
Oh,
Oh,
okay. So you
yes.
know what I'm talking about. They're like,
Yes. Hmm.
yeah, they're more.
Yeah.
They're not always alpha, but they just you never see that side of them, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
no, Jack
Makes
was
sense.
new.
Which is
Yeah.
interesting because he does work. I mean, he does have, there are rom-com tenets in the book, right? They're meet cute with,
Yeah,
there are a lot of comedic relief moments. I do think I see the nods to the rom-com that work really well. Um, so, but it sounds like, I mean, you just have solid intuition. That's what I'm hearing
yeah.
from that.
In
Is
this
you
book,
just have
not always, but
great.
this time around I did.
That's funny. Um, I kind of also wanted to ask you, there was one quote, if you're okay with me reading it. I'm not going to ask you what page it comes from, I
Thank you.
promise. Uh,
But I have a
but
book
there
if
was
I
one,
need it.
I know. But there was one quote from the book that I really loved. And it occurred, and this is kind of when Nora, like everything is falling apart. And she kind of starts thinking, and she's like, it occurred to her that maybe this was how she needed to look at her reverse bucket list. Instead of seeing a defeat, maybe all she had to do was open her mind to different interpretations. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And I'm kind of wondering, when you're writing something like that, do you think it's going to stick with the reader? How do you plan for writing something that you think could potentially be impactful? And do you think about it beforehand, or do you just like kind of come across it as you're writing her thought process?
Well, I think her thought process becomes clearer as I write her. She's edited and edited and edited as I kind of work through the character. Um, I had a thought and I lost it about how I did that, but I also think that Nora, that whole transformation, and I did read a lot about near death experience too, and that some of the things that her counselor tells her are hallmarks of near death experience are pretty universal for people who've experienced it, and one of those is kind of like that opening of the mind to different ways of thinking or viewing things. And I don't know that it's automatic. I didn't run across that, but I thought that she would, after all that she'd been through, would start to see that maybe, she needed to tweak the way she was looking at things, much like we all need to tweak the way we look at things. I can't think of a specific example from my own life, but stuff comes up where I have a pretty dyed in the wool view until I start to see things a little differently. And then I start to, think about that problem from a different perspective.
And I
So,
think that's
yeah.
why that sentence stuck with me too, because I think we've all been through parts in our lives that kind of like, oh yeah, maybe you get so like focused on that one thing that can drag you down, but it's just changing that perspective. So
Yeah, or it
I
has
love
made
that.
you miserable until you really thought
Yes.
about it. You didn't know, why. Maybe if I looked at it differently, I wouldn't be so miserable with it.
Yep, exactly.
I feel like I'm kind of rambling. I know what's in my head, but I don't know how to articulate it
No,
exactly.
you're not rambling at all. We're nodding
Yeah.
in complete agreement. I
Okay,
think
good.
Hmm.
it's such a
Yeah.
relatable, it's such a relatable experience. It's like that old adage, right? If you want to make God laugh, make a plan. Or
Yes,
Hmm.
that
exactly.
is,
Yeah.
it's one of the best parts of the book is like how often Magda and I talked about this a lot, about how like Nora is so often close to the mark of what her is causing disruptions in her relationships, but like a little off,
Yeah.
and I think so much of it is just like, yeah, exactly what you're saying. Her shifting perspective and seeing, well, an art class is probably not going to cure Gus's alcoholism, but maybe showing up consistently for that activity will. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
very, very relatable.
And I also think, like a lot of times you're presented with a problem like her cousin's alcoholism that you really don't know how to help. And so she was
Right.
grabbing at straws with like the art class.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful framework, right? Just to
Yeah.
say like sometimes it's just presence,
Yeah.
Yep.
it's really her, the way she shows up in relationships, I think is something that we were both so drawn to, and sort of her building on her ability to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that Gus kind of tells her that too at some point. Like, you think that I'm having alcoholism because you were not here. Like, I think he
Yeah.
kind of like mentions that at some point, and
Yeah.
it was like a really honest type of thing. So I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
And we have like two more easy questions for you.
Okay.
All right. So the first one was there anything that you put in the book that you just loved and maybe nobody has called out just yet? Because I'm gonna tell you my favorite thing, and I haven't heard anybody talked about this, and it's when the older people are calling TikTok the tick. I laughed out loud when you wrote that. Like I still like randomly think about it, and I'm like, when I open up my TikTok app, I'm like, oh, I'm on the tick, and I just love
Yeah.
that.
Oh, well, they were such a fun group because you know how it is. People that age think they're hip and they're so not. I just loved it. And I loved creating Catherine Henry,
Oh
star of
yes,
stage. I mean,
Mhm.
she
loved
just,
her.
I hope I'm like her in a few years when I am her age, but yeah, I just really
Yeah.
love her. But
She was great. We
I can't really think of. I mean, I loved the whole scene in the convenience store, in the corner store with the robber who couldn't rob. And how it became kind of funny. I mean, because you know how like when you're in church or in danger, you laugh when you're not supposed to, and it just
Right.
seemed like a perfect time for them to, like the anxiety comes out in laughter because he's so bad at it. But I loved that part of it, the whole thing in the corner store and with Juanita there talking to her sister on the phone, and the robber forgets to take their phone, so they're. So
I
that
that's
think
was
so
it's
good.
telling too that the Darth Vader mask is just an aside to all the other funny things happening. There's just a lot going on there. That's a perfect like comedy of errors. It's great.
and we have to think about like why did he choose a Darth Vader mask? Because I think I'd be doing the same thing. I'd be sitting back there like, wait a minute, what was the thought process?
I don't know. He probably was strapped for cash. He went to Comic Con at some point and he
Right.
just got the costume. He's like, I'm just gonna do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Magda and I both agree. We want a book on
Yeah.
every single side character. We talked for probably 30 minutes about Catherine,
Oh,
and
Yes.
she's just a great. I mean, there's just your side characters. We could spend 45 more minutes talking about our questions about them, but they're just so like fully formed and wonderful.
excuse me. I went to an author event with Sherry Thomas the other night, and she was talking about that. Like, side characters are always much more interesting than the main characters because you just get that glimpse of them, and you're like curious about them. And but I've
Mhm.
always really enjoyed inventing side characters. They're fun.
Yeah, like
Did you
why did
pick
Catherine's friend like Venus flytraps? I must know. How did he land
Yeah,
on the Venus flytrap?
award-winning Venus
Yeah.
flytraps.
Yes.
that's right.
Sorry, Magda, what were you gonna
And
say?
I was gonna say, like, do you picture anyone when you're writing these characters? Because as I was reading the Catherine, like I just kind of picture her as Catherine O'Hara from like as she's playing like the
Oh,
mom in Schitt's Creek, and that's all I could
yes.
picture as I was reading her. So
No, I
do
did
you?
not picture her, but she's perfect. She's
Yeah, right.
perfect
Like
for that. But no, I know they just, they're just people to me, but I don't care. I don't imagine anybody.
it's amazing.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is. Like I just randomly when I'm reading, I'm like, who would play this character? And that's immediately who came to mind
she would be
when we were
great.
reading her. Yeah.
She'd be
Mhm.
perfect. Yeah. And Eugene Levy could be Walter, her sidekick
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
perfect. Yeah, exactly.
character.
um, all right, and then we have one last question to kind of close it out. I was wondering if you can maybe give us an update on your owl. We kind of follow you on social media, and you kind of
Yeah,
posted that there was an owl in that kind of hit one of the windows on your house, and it was kind of showing up a little bit around it. Any
he did.
updates?
I was like fascinated by that owl, and he flew hard into the window, and he was on the patio. I have a dog, and my dog wanted him so bad, but we picked him up. I mean, he was so interesting. He just stood there and let us and took him out to the front yard away from the dog. And he sat out there in the grass, his head going around. I touched him and everything, but I kept going out there and he was there. And then about an hour later, he was gone. And then the next morning, he flew back and sat on my pergola. And I went up to him and he just looked at me, but that's the last I've seen him. I swear he came back to tell me he was okay. That's what I think in
Oh
my,
yeah.
my
Oh, for
head.
sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's got to be some kind of good omen for sure. It's
That's what
yeah.
I thought. And just, to touch that owl, and he was so soft, and yeah, it was really wild. That was, and it didn't get near the traction I thought it would. I thought everybody'd be like hordes would be coming by to see my owl, and it just didn't happen.
We're deeply invested in the
We're there.
owl.
If I see him again, I'll post. But he came back that next morning. I've never seen him again. And I'm assuming it's a he. I have no idea how you can tell boy girls from girl owls. So
No idea. I'm
He's
very
he's told
jealous.
you.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm very jealous that you got to pet it though, because that's something that's a very unique experience. And
Yes, he
yeah,
was
that's amazing.
so. I don't know if it's just so stunned or just so like docile, but didn't mind at all, and so light. And I don't know. That was really wild. And their heads really do turn around all the way.
Terrifying, but also very cool.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right, and those are all the questions that we had for you today, Julia. So thanks so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure chatting with you. Do you want to tell us listeners or anybody out there what you're currently working on and how we can potentially find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm actually writing a book now about a woman who's dealing with the aftermath of her sister's addiction, lifelong addiction with a sister. And the sister has gone to live with her father in Florida. So it's just her name's Lorna, trying to like claw her life back that was sort of consumed by the addiction in a family. So I've been reading a lot about how addiction affects a family. So that's the next one. It comes out next summer, and it's called Everything is Probably Fine. We just came up with that title. That's why I'm like, what was it again? Everything is
Great.
Probably Fine. And I have a rom-com, one last rom-com coming out next fall. And it's called Have Yourself a Merry Little Affair. Romance. We changed it from affair to romance. Have Yourself a Merry Little Romance. But it's a couple in their 50s. And so it's a forced proximity at a lake with snow. Of course, it's a Christmas book. But it was fun writing them in their 50s. And her mother comes with some friends, and they all get snowed in. So you've got the bossy posse and these two people, and all this stuff that goes in a blind dog. I mean, so that's coming next fall. And then, of course, I'm mostly on Instagram. I've been trying to do. I mean, try is a strength. It's not the true word. I've been contemplating doing more on TikTok, mainly because my publishers would really like me to be there. They think that's the panacea to all publishing problems. But I can't, I'm just, not going to like film myself several times a day, and I don't have that much to say. And, the other thing about TikTok is it's just like, I've heard stories about the things that go viral are so beyond my ability to understand. Like somebody will, they'll do something funny with a cup, and that thing takes off. The cup goes spiral, and suddenly that's the big TikTok video. And I don't get it. I just don't get it. But so Instagram and Facebook, of course, they're kind of connected, but that's really where I am most of the time.
And what's your Instagram handle?
It's Julia _F_London.
Perfect.
Yeah. And I think it's just Julia London on Facebook. But, they're connected. So, yeah.
Beautiful. And yeah, for every viral TikTok, there's an owl story that people want to see. So don't sell yourself short.
I should put that up on TikTok. I really should. Yeah.
I think you should.
It's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've learned our lesson as non-social media people as well. We feel the pain.
Yeah, it's hard. That I've blown it because I didn't do a video of the owl the next day. I just took a picture of him. But I can do the first one and stick that up there. Like, this is my charmed life.
And TikTok has the autocut, so you can just grab a picture and then they'll just like show it in different ways and make a whole video out of it.
Yeah, see, I need a TikTok manager, I think. But I honestly don't think that's going to be my new social media career. I really don't think I think I'll just stick to Instagram.
You've got a lot of great things going for you, Julia. I'm not sure that TikTok content creator is
Thank you.
necessarily something you need
I'm going
to
to tell my
focus on.
publisher.
Yeah.
But
Oh my
well,
God,
I
that's
really
amazing.
appreciate y'all having me. I love your podcast. I think you should have more authors on here. I know
We
some.
love.
You are. Yeah. Yeah, we are. Yeah, I think thank you so much for agreeing for kind of joining us today. This was such a fun experience. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to get a few more authors in. And it was such a fun experience chatting with you.
Yeah, it was y'all too. I feel really special with first author. So
Thank you for listening to Literally Books, the podcast.
Where we say what we read.
And we mean what we say. Bye.